Hey pals, welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be talking about rules in pixel art and when to break them. The two things that I think are really common for pixel artists when making games is the idea of pixel perfect and the idea of sticking to a palette. These are two principles that get passed around all the time, and I want you to know that a lot of games, including mine, break these rules very intentionally, and the key is really knowing when and how. So let's get into it. So here's a screenshot from my passion project, Insignia. I stream the development 5 days a week on twitch.tv/AdamCUnis. Go check it out. And basically what you're looking at here is, this is a screenshot of the game. The game is a pixel art game. So of course, all of the pixels are, they're pixels, right? Every little square is made to represent the entire image, except this is not a screenshot of my game. This is an AEST file. And the way that I captured this screenshot was to go to my game and set the resolution of the output in Unity to 640 by 360, right? I'm locking the game's output to a texture that's only as big as the pixel art is. But when I'm actually playing the game, when I export it, when I'm running it and playtesting it, what I actually do is run it in 1080p, right? We've got lots of pixels in our screens, and I want to use all of them. So if I take a look at this, you can see here that not every pixel aligns, right? This little space right here shows you that, well, if this is one pixel here, this space is not a pixel, right? It's not pixel perfect. And when we talk about what is pixel perfect and why it's important, oftentimes what we're really talking about is the idea of pixels that are scaled incorrectly. Right, you've got sprites that are all over the place. Some of them are too big. Some of them are rotated off axis, especially if you've got art, characters where one character's sprite is drawn in such a way that their pixels are bigger than these. This looks bad. This is called mixels, right? And we don't want this to happen. So then, of course, why not make the game look like this, right? Just lock the whole thing to a 640 by 360 texture. To play the game this way is not fun. I want to show you what I mean by that. So this is the game in 640 by 360, and we're going to scale it up to 3x so that now we're looking at it in, 1080p, where every one of those 640 by 360 pixels is multiplied by 4. So we're upscaling to a nearest neighbor, right? Now this looks good as long as the camera is not moving. Because the game is operating with parallax layers, right? We've got layers of things in the background. Those things move at different paces. And when we try to move a subtle amount, right, those parallax layers want to move at different intervals, right? So in order to move the camera from here to here, like these things are catching up, but they're clipping over that, integer number of pixels at rates that are not very pleasant to look at. What we've done is quantized the space, and we've quantized a lot of this like very subtle movement that we would otherwise really want to see in a game with a nice free moving camera. And what that results in is, well, it looks janky, right? It doesn't look very good. Even though the screenshot looks good, the movement doesn't feel good. And for a game like mine where you've got, a lot of movement on like two axes, right? We're going up, we're going forward, we're going up and forward. We've got lots of different little parkour options. You can't really enjoy the game with a camera that's moving subtly, but with everything janking all over the place. It kind of feels a lot like the PS1 era games where vectors and all the geometry would start clipping around like this as the camera was zooming in. PS1 Hagrid's face jolting around all over the shop. That kind of thing isn't really contributing to the play experience. On the flip side, if I just take this and pop it up into, 1080p, go back to full screen, now we've got this beautifully smooth camera. No problems at all. Everything is moving at the pace that it needs to, and it feels nice. I don't notice that the pixels aren't aligned unless I'm really looking very carefully, but I don't feel like that's an issue. And in fact, even when it comes to rotation, this is something that I try to do tastefully. This beehive here, you can kind of whack it with your sword. It'll rotate. The pixels are the correct size. So the actual art is the same size as everything else, but it does rotate at, whatever angles we want it to rotate at. This isn't something that I would sacrifice just to say that my game adhered to pixel perfection the whole way through the game. It's just not something that I'm interested in. So pixel perfection isn't the only area where I think this applies. It also applies to palettes. So again, here is Armin from Insignia. Here is my palette. It's the current palette that I'm working with on Insignia. It's got, something like 46 colors or so. And I do use this palette throughout the whole game, right? Every art file, when I load it up and I start with a new canvas, I have this palette next to me. So from the position of first principles and, approaching the game, I do have a palette. But I never let that palette stand in the way of a good sprite. So an example would be this mock-up that I'm doing for a level at the moment. You can see here, the palette is mostly the same, but with differences. If you look back and forth, the greens are a bit more muted. There are a lot more steps between them, and the grays as well. We've got more steps, and that's because the scene is darker. I want to show more subtlety between these greens. I wanted to set a mood that is difficult for me to set within the context of my base palette. Now I still want to use the same colors. The ramps are basically occupying the same space, but I might need more fidelity between certain colors, or oftentimes I want to blend between two ramps. So if I had some sort of like green and pink sort of blend that I needed to do for whatever reason, say I've got flowers that are fading off into the distance, and the flowers that are in the dark further away from the camera need to be a little bit more muted. You can always try to do something creative with your existing palette. You could do things like dithering and checkerboard, the two different colors to try to find a blending point in the middle, or just use colors that you wouldn't ordinarily use, and maybe you get something interesting and cool. But failing that, and though I do try that, oftentimes you just want to make the scene look how you imagine it, right? Like I don't have this desaturated blue in my palette, this thing that bridges between my kind of greeny grays of my stone and the blues that I use for the sky. But if I add one color just for this screen, it looks way better. Subtlety is more important than palette perfection, right? There's no need to be an elitist if it means your game is going to look that much better. Because at the end of the day, the thing that you should care about, and I can't stress this enough, is your audience. It's your players. They're the ones who actually pay for the game. They're the ones who are going to be reviewing it, telling their friends. If you want to do this as a career, you should care about the people who are going to make your career, not the random people on the internet who, think that they know best because they were around 40 years ago and blah, 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 blah. It's also really important to recognize the difference between today's media and the devices that we consume that media on, and classic media and the classic devices. So, CRT displays, while they are, warm and there is a love for that era, and there are ways of emulating a CRT output with shaders, if you're not specifically doing that, then the art that you create for your game, the constraints that you have, and the motivations for why you would want to do one thing or another, that's your business, right? That's between you and your audience. If you're making art in today's world, you have to think about how that art looks on an OLED display, on an LCD display, on TikTok, on Twitch, on YouTube, in trailers, on Steam, in screenshots. These are the places that are going to make or break the success of your game or your art, not how things would have looked on a 90s display, again, unless you're doing filtering for that stuff. This is something that I think is really important, especially today when it's really hard to get started with this stuff. Social media is really competitive. The industries are, very difficult to get into. And so not being misdirected on where you should be focusing your energy is really, really important. Ultimately, at least in my opinion, what this stuff comes down to is matters of taste and consistency that is relative. So as long as your game fits itself and abides by rules that work and are marketable, that's the stuff that really matters. And it's up to you to determine what that looks like. Usually through adaptation, through flexibility, trying new things, showing it to your audience, building that audience organically, and seeing what people will respond to. I know in my game, from even a design perspective, I've gone through a lot of my early years as a designer, developer, director, really trying to follow in the footsteps of my favorite games. And oftentimes doing that in a way that is more rose tinted than anything else. You know, I'll go back and I'll play these old games and I'll think, oh, this actually isn't how I remember it. This is way less polished, way less interesting. You know, I was playing Super Mario Sunshine in the Mario 3D trilogy that got released on the Switch a couple of years ago with my wife just yesterday. And she's playing Sunshine, and I'm thinking to myself, man, how did they get away with some of these level design choices or the player controller? Like, Mario's kind of trash in this game. So it's really important to be grounded in this stuff. You know, look at references. And even with modern games, like I was looking at Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge recently, and that game is it's a beat 'em up. It's on the Switch. The native resolution for the pixel art is 480 by 270, which does not multiply evenly into 720p, which is the handheld resolution of the Nintendo Switch. So in order to get that game to scale nicely on the Switch, you either have to cut off pixels or just use a bilinear filter, like blurring the pixel art, which is kind of what they do, and they kind of get away with it. What ultimately matters is the sales at the end of the day and what people experience when they play the game. And if they like the game and they don't notice that things aren't perfect, all the better for you, right? It's one less constraint that you have to deal with. You know, I'm this way because I've been through this. You know, I started making games off of wanting to emulate things like Shovel Knight, which are very, very respectful to the limitations of old consoles. And the more that I make my game, the more I realize that being pragmatic about this stuff is way more important, especially when it comes to, you know, getting the game out there. Speaking of which, a quick update on Insignia. It's coming along really well. I've spent the last 6 months with my team that I built off the back of that grant funding, building a demo that we're going to be taking to either publishers or Kickstarter or both very, very soon. I'm actually booking flights to GDC this week. So I'm going to be looking for basically the rest of the funding for the game so that we can finish the project. And yeah, as I've been going through this process, you know, learning to care most about what matters and to seek what matters is so key in actually finishing stuff and not putting yourself in, you know, scope creep for the sake of insecurity or perfectionism or imposter syndrome, anything like that. At the end of the day, getting to a place where you have to make decisions that are pragmatic for the purpose of the game being fun and complete. It's the trial by fire that I think you need if you're starting out. And so I hope that if you're working on a project, you learn something from this video. And if you are interested in what I'm doing, please come and check out the Twitch stream at twitch.tv/AdamCYunus. I stream there 5 days a week, 5 hours a day. I go through topics like this on stream while I'm making the game. So if you want more insights into just how I'm doing, how the project's going, if you want to get excited about it, join us on Discord, and I'll see you there. So thank you so much for watching. And as always, I've been Adam. You've been the Pixel Pals. Until next time.